Good morning. We appreciate everyone joining us today, and we're very excited to have Barbara Kaplan, Lisa Caldwell, and Jeremy Kranowitz with us, who will present their expert knowledge on understanding asthma. This webinar is being recorded and added to the IRHA resources for all of our members around the state. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. As I mentioned, we're recording today's session and it will be available on the IRHA YouTube channel within 1 week once the recording is processed. If at any point during the presentation you want to ask a question, please use the Q&A function. This function is accessible by hovering your mouse over the screen. It should pop up either at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what mode you're in. IRHA staff will keep an eye out for those questions and will moderate for the presenters so they don't have to check them during their presentation. I will now turn it over to our speakers for their presentation.
Awesome. Am I sharing? Oh, wait, I'm not sharing yet. 1 second. Now am I sharing? Hopefully so. Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Kaplan. I'm the National Director for Asthma Programs at the American Lung Association. And I'm going to begin our presentation today speaking a little bit about sort of setting the foundation. So understanding asthma and the importance of exercise. Our goal here really is to learn a little bit about how the lungs work, about asthma and exercise, and then hopefully identifying the 3 primary changes that take place in an individual who has asthma. And I want to describe exercise-induced asthma, or as we now call it, exercise-induced bronchospasm. So to begin, I'm going to play this quick animation. The American Lung Association has developed this little 2-minute animation, and it's a great way to sort of explain the basics of what asthma is. It can be used to educate individuals with asthma, school professionals who work with individuals with asthma, and also parents as well. So we'll take a quick look and
Asthma is a chronic lung disease that can cause breathing problems throughout someone's lifetime. When you have asthma, there is always a little swelling or inflammation inside the airways, with or without symptoms. Your lungs react to things that may not bother other people. These are known as triggers. Asthma can cause changes within the airway, all of which narrow the opening, making it difficult to breathe. A healthy airway is clear with no interior swelling, and the muscle bands around the airways are not tight. There is no extra mucus. Air moves freely through the open airway. When you have asthma, 3 main changes can happen in your lungs. If your asthma is left untreated or poorly controlled, changes to the structure of the airway may be permanent. 1 is swelling or inflammation. This is when the airway becomes swollen and irritated. When the airway becomes inflamed, it narrows, and it is hard for air to flow through. Another change that can occur with asthma is extra mucus production, which clogs the airway, making the opening even smaller. The third change that can happen with asthma is the tightening of the muscles that surround your airways, called bronchoconstriction. This reduces the opening even more. When someone with asthma comes in contact with an asthma trigger, such as dust, tobacco smoke, or even when laughing, any one or all 3 of the airway changes can happen. This is known as an asthma attack, or episode. All of these changes contribute to the narrowing of the airways, making it hard to breathe. Learn more at lung.org/asthma.
okay. So hopefully that worked and everyone was able to hear that. So now that we understand a little bit about what causes what happens in the airways when someone has asthma, I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the causes of asthma. So asthma, what causes asthma is poorly understood. However, we are learning more about asthma every day, and recent studies have shown that asthma is not really thought of anymore as a single disease, but rather it consists of various phenotypes or characteristics that are grouped together. Some examples of this are allergic asthma, non-allergic asthma, aspirin-induced asthma, severe asthma, and then what we're going to talk about today, exercise-induced asthma. So scientists continue to explore what causes asthma, but we do know that these factors play an important role in the development of asthma, and that's the family history or your genetics, allergies, your early life exposure to viral infections, smoking, exposure to air pollution, obesity, and occupational exposure. Some common indoor and outdoor triggers are the ones that you see here on the screen, but today I'm really going to focus on the top row here. We're going to talk quite a bit about air pollution, smoke from fires and cigarettes, but mostly wildfire smoke and how that contributes to air pollution. Cold, windy, or stormy weather, pollen from grasses, trees, and weeds. So all of these, when we are thinking about children who are exercising and being exposed to some of these triggers outdoors, we'll talk about some of the strategies and management steps to avoid those triggers later on in today's presentation. These are some of the things that contribute to poor asthma control. We talked just briefly about asthma triggers, so those indoor and outdoor air pollutants. But we also know that allergen exposure, so exposure to pollens and molds, can also contribute to poor asthma control, as well as respiratory infections. And then there are some behaviors that also contribute to poor asthma control. Things like being exposed to indoor and outdoor air pollutants and being exposed to those allergens outdoors, not taking daily controller medicines to control the inflammation in your airways, and as well as inactivity or excessive weight. So obesity, I wanted to focus just a moment on that very last point, because obesity is associated significantly with the development of asthma, worsening asthma symptoms even, and poor asthma control. So this is leading to increased medication use and hospitalizations, according to the CDC data. A study at Duke University included health data for more than 500,000 children in the US, and it suggested that obesity might be to blame for about a quarter, so 23 to 27% of asthma in children who are obese. So in this study, about 8.9% overweight or obesity in children who are 2 to 5, 17% in children ages 6 to 11, and a little over 20% of children who are 20 to 19 years old. So in this study, they identified that obesity increases the risk for developing asthma. And it has been increasing over the past decade, and prevalence is roughly double in children with asthma. So all this to say, as we talk about exercise and asthma, exercise is really important to your overall health, but can be especially important for people living with a chronic lung disease such as asthma. And a lot of times individuals may use their asthma as a reason to not exercise and be active. And so I hope one message you'll walk away with today is everybody with asthma can exercise, and we want to encourage that behavior. So exercise is unfortunately a common trigger for many people with asthma. For some individuals, exercise, they only have symptoms when they exercise. And for others, they have exercise with asthma, or even we're finding exercise without asthma, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The term to describe this condition is exercise-induced bronchospasm. It used to be called exercise-induced asthma, and you might have heard of exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, rather. It means that exercise causes the airways or the bronchi to narrow or constrict. So the cause of exercise-induced bronchospasm is not completely understood. When you exercise, you breathe faster and deeper due to increased oxygen demands of your body. Usually inhale through your mouth during exercise, causing the air to be drier and cooler than when you breathe through your nose. So that dry, cool air is the main trigger for airway narrowing, or this bronchoconstriction that happens. So the other thing is that breathing in air pollution, chemicals or allergens like pollen, that can also be a factor when we talk about exercise-induced asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. Since we breathe in more when we exercise, a lot of potential triggers are breathed in at that point. So what is exercise-induced bronchoconstriction? It's defined as airway narrowing during or after exercise. Symptoms such as coughing, wheezing, shortness of breath, or chest tightness is what people experience. And this can start within a few minutes of starting any exercise and continue to 10 to 15 minutes after exercise. It's not that about 90% of people with asthma will have exercise-induced bronchospasm. But not everybody with exercise-induced bronchoconstriction will have asthma. So I think that's an important distinction. It's most often associated with breathing in cold, dry air, exercising when pollen counts are high, and exercising when high outdoor air pollution levels are high. Common activities that are associated with exercise-induced bronchoconstriction include endurance sports, that require you to breathe heavily and consistently. Think about like running, soccer and basketball, and then cold weather sports like skiing, ice hockey, ice skating, snowboarding. So deciphering between normal versus abnormal, and I think this is kind of important, especially as we think about exercise-induced bronchoconstriction with or without asthma. So for an individual with asthma, you'll see symptoms after exercise or later in longer workouts, including expiratory wheeze and coughing. You also see symptoms shortly after starting an exercise, so including wheezing, coughing, and chest tightness. But in individuals without asthma, this might look like a lot of sweating, red in the face, rapid breathing, panting, breathlessness, some vocal cord problems, inspiratory noise, and trouble breathing in. Let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of exercise. We hear it all the time. Exercise is good for our overall health and for keeping our lungs and muscles that are involved in breathing strong. Your body does need exercise. It's not only good for lung health, but it is also good for your brain health and reducing stress. So stress is also can be a trigger for people with asthma. So having a good exercise regimen can be very healthy overall for individuals with and without asthma. A last point to make, it can be, exercise can be very beneficial to people with asthma, improving airway function and really strengthening those breathing muscles. All right, so this is towards the end of my presentation. This first part of my presentation here, I have another animation here about how the lung works, and I'm actually just going to tell you about it instead of playing this one for you. It's a little over 2 minutes, and so I don't want to cut into any of the other speakers' time. But it's a great animation if we are just wanting to explain the importance of breathing healthy air and exercising and improving lung function. So I would encourage folks to take a look and visit the lung.org to access the How the Lungs Work animation. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for the moment, and we can move on to the next speaker.
Great. I think that is me. Hi, everyone. I am Jeremy Kranowitz. I'm the CEO at Keep Indianapolis Beautiful. I'm going to load up my slides here. Okay, so I'm going to quickly give a little bit of context about Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, and then turn at the end in particular to some of the work that we're doing that has impacts on asthma. Interestingly, I've already learned something new. I, as a child, had exercise-induced asthma and will now need to use new terms to describe it. But as a child, had situations where I wanted to be a soccer player and could not play soccer on poor air quality days because it would trigger asthma attacks. And so had a very early awareness of how environmental factors can impact health. And really that was one of the factors that launched me into a career working on trying to make the environment a better place. So to quickly give a little bit of background about Keep Indianapolis Beautiful, we are one of the oldest environmental organizations in the state. We date back to the Hudnut administration in the 70s. There are nonprofit rating agencies. GuideStar is one of the leading rating agencies, and KIB is a platinum rated nonprofit. And folks may recall, depending on your age, but there were public service announcements actually in the 70s with a Native American looking at the litter in the New York Harbor and a single tear running down his eye. That is part of the Keep America Beautiful network. There are over 700 affiliates across the country, and Keep Indianapolis Beautiful is the largest in that network. There are larger cities like LA, Chicago, New York, but we have the biggest in the entire network. And one of the other things is that we don't do advocacy work. We are really just working to make the city cleaner and greener and working with everyone. So I talked about this as a sort of run through the garden. I was in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and of course, if you're there and need to order a hot dog, the best way to do it is to say I need to run through the garden, where they throw everything that they can find on there. But wanted to just sort of have this as a funny sidebar, but give some surprising things that you uncover as you dig through that run through the garden. So one of the things that may be surprising to folks is that when we have less litter in our neighborhoods, we actually start to see less violence in our neighborhoods. When we have more green spaces in our neighborhoods, we have reductions in various environmental contaminants, including lead. And the last one that I'll spend more time on is when we have more urban trees, we have air quality improvements, including positive impacts on asthma and asthma attacks. So KIB did an analysis about a year and a half ago where we divided the city into census tracts And we used a number of different factors to analyze which neighborhoods had the most environmental benefits and which had the fewest, and decided to create a heat map of sorts where we could focus our attention and try to make the city more environmentally equitable. One of the key pieces of this that I'll talk about is tree canopy. So there are some places, you can see in the top left corner, for example, if you're up in Eagle Creek, or if you're in the Northeast up by Geist, where the city is has a heavy tree canopy, perhaps 2/3 to 70% of the land has tree coverage. And there are other parts of the city, particularly on near west, far east side, where the tree canopy can be less than 10%. So there's really a wide variance across the city. It probably is not surprising to folks that areas that were historically redlined also were underinvested in terms of green infrastructure. And so there's a strong correlation there. But wanted to just show that we are using an analytic approach to try to figure out where to bring our resources to the places where it will make the biggest difference. I'm going to talk briefly about litter. I know the conversation is about asthma, but having cleaner cities creates opportunities for cleaner air, cleaner water, and fewer of the triggers that Barbara mentioned. I want to just mention quickly that there was a litter census recently, and they determined that there are 50 billion pieces of observable litter. So that's not microplastics, but that's everything that you can see down to about the size of a cigarette butt. So it's over 150 pieces of litter per person. And we have been doing some research with the University of Michigan School of Public Health, and they have determined that if we have folks that are engaging in their environment to help pick up litter from vacant lots, or to mow the lawn, or I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but to create vibrant green spaces, it actually has a really surprising impact that it reduces violent crime. This is off topic for today's conversation, but I think it's so fascinating that if we had more green spaces and more access to green spaces, we would have a safer city. And so just pairing on to the conversations about reluctance to get outside, yes, health may be one reason, but safety may be another reason. And so if we can create a safer city, that creates more opportunities for people to play safely outdoors. The other thing that I want to mention is that we take vacant and abandoned lots around the city and convert them into vibrant neighborhood green spaces. We've created about 60 of them across the city. And we know from research that when you have more access to green space, that your happiness increases. We know that when you've got access to green spaces versus being, on busy streets and near lots of traffic and other things, that your blood pressure is lower. And we also know that we've got improvements in air pollution, lower water pollution, lower soil pollution. In particular, we're doing a partnership right now with IUPUI, and we are doing assessments in some of the green spaces that we create around the city. This is a picture of one of them that we created on the Far East Side. And we've been doing soil surveys. There's actually a surprising amount of lead in surface soils across the city. And when KIB actually goes in and starts adding layers of trees and mulch and new pathways to walk along and et cetera, we're actually creating protective barriers from some of the contaminants that are sitting in the surface soils that otherwise could be kicked up over a long dry spell like we had this summer and exacerbate air pollution concerns. And so this is actually adding protective layers, and the preliminary research suggests that it is, as we hypothesized, that it is lowering the impacts of ground and air pollutants, particularly important for young children. This green space is adjacent to an early education center on the east side. So I want to just turn quickly to trees in particular. KIB plants more trees for the city than the city does for itself. We are its trusted partner. We also plant thousands of trees for Citizens Energy, for AES Indiana, and for a number of private firms as well. So we're planting about 4,000 trees every year. If you drive around Indianapolis and you see a young tree with a white tree guard around its base, that is going to be one of Keep Indianapolis Beautiful's trees. And so you can now see them and appreciate them in all the neighborhoods that you may visit. But I want to really focus here, which is to talk about some of the benefits. So when we have an acre of trees, mature trees in place, those trees are absorbing the amount of carbon dioxide from 26,000 cars driving a mile, or one car driving 26,000 miles. You can flip it either way. But it is really important as we think about changes to the climate that we think about trees as one of the important mitigating opportunities. As we all know, particulate matter, pollution, particulate matter, and or soot can easily be triggers for asthma attacks. Trees absorb a lot of particulate matter. So if a mature tree is absorbing over 120 pounds of particulate pollution a year, we measure particulate matter in nanograms. So it is trillions of particles that are being absorbed by trees and not going into our lungs. There was an interesting study that folks that were in hospitals, if they had views of nature out of their windows, they actually recovered faster than those who had views of gray infrastructure like parking lots. And when we have workers in offices with nice views out their window, they report in sick fewer times. The last bullet, though, that I really want to talk about is there was a study about 4 or 5 years ago by the University of Exeter with a cohort of about 650,000 people over 15 years. And they determined that having about 800 more trees per square mile resulted in 50 fewer emergency asthma cases per 100,000 residents. So the interesting thing is that while some flowers and grasses may have pollens or other aspects that could potentially trigger asthma attacks, it appears that trees do the reverse, that having more trees is actually quite beneficial for fewer asthma cases. So if that's interesting and you're worried about how we all could play a role, Keep Indianapolis Beautiful has a project volunteer page. It's at kibi.org/projects. And there are, especially in the spring and fall, opportunities to come out and join us. We teach you the right way to plant a tree so that it will grow and thrive and survive. And there are opportunities, and here are just the next 4 things coming up on our calendar this month. But you can see that there are 2 tree plantings, one this Saturday and one on the 29th, where we still need more volunteers. So if folks are interested in coming out and helping and making a difference, we would love to see you. So I will stop there and pause and I guess pass the baton, and happy to answer questions afterwards. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. There we go. Well, my name is Lisa Caldwell, and I work for the Marion County Public Health Department. I'm also one of the co-chairs for NJAC Environmental Triggers Committee. So I'm going to see if I can try to merge the two previous presentations and set up for the last presentation dealing with triggers. So I'm really going to kind of list some of these, bring some things to your attention that you may not have thought of as asthma triggers, and trying to make people more aware. As the first speaker talked about, we definitely want people outside. We want them exercising. We want them, enjoying the outdoor space, using the green space that Jeremy talked about. But every individual is different, and you really need to be aware of what your trigger, an asthmatic needs to be aware of what their triggers are so that they can enjoy that green space as much as possible. I'm really going to talk about three primary triggers here, and those are allergens, irritants, which have been referred to as just general pollution, and then also weather. And again, kind of picking and pulling from each of the previous speakers and trying to do a little more deep dive. If it wasn't mentioned already, just for those who may not be aware, an allergen is really something that attacks the body and creates an Ig antibody protein in the environment, and then starts having those three reactions that Barbara talked about. I think it's important for people to realize that a large percentage of asthmatics also have allergies, and depending which literature and which study you look at, it's usually anywhere from 50% of 90 or up to 92% of asthmatics have some allergy component to their illness. As I said before, it's very individualistic, and it's important to identify because one size doesn't fit all. And so keep that in mind as I'm talking about these issues, as far as what may or may not be something to pay attention to, whether it's yourself or any of your clients. Allergens, I think the presentation talks about winter, spring, summer, and fall, needing to enjoy the environment all times of the year. And we're dealing with different outdoor allergens, different times of the year. Winter, not so much. A lot of things are dead. A lot of things aren't, there are no spores being created, not a lot of things germinating and growing. However, there is a lot of dirt, a lot of decomposed leaves that may have not got raked up, and they are decomposing, and so there are outdoor molds. And so depending what may or may not be going on outside, if you're dealing with dirt in any capacity, whether it's a nice day and you're trying to do something with your garden or your landscaping, that may be something that's going on. If there's some sort of work going on in a park that's disturbing the soil during that time of year while you're enjoying the park, that may be something to be aware of. Springtime, although we just heard that trees are great for asthmatics, if they're actually pollinating in the spring and you have a tree allergy, Like I said, usually April and May are the two busy times for tree allergies. And I myself experienced some of those. So I definitely need to make sure I'm on medications during that time of year for my allergies. And the end of spring, grass starts. So just think about what's happening in your neighborhood as you're walking through the neighborhood or walking through your park. Obviously, you see the trees blooming. People start cutting their grass around that time of year. Some people start a little earlier than others, but things that are going to be put out into the air are things to be aware of. Summer is the highest time, obviously, for grasses, May through July. And again, for that green space, we want it to be maintained, no pollution. We want grasses cut. But again, those are things that could be put in the environment. So if you're enjoying the park on the day that they're mowing grass and you're asthmatic, that may be something to be aware of that, you know, like I said, either make sure you're following your doctor medication prescriptions, or maybe find another area of the park to enjoy during that day. Also paying attention to wind direction, because if wind's blowing away from you, it may not be so bad, but if wind's blowing toward you, then your exposure may be amplified. Fall, and sometimes actually, if you consider August, here in Indiana, it ends up being August, ragweed starts. It's usually somewhere between the 5th and 10th of August every year, it seems like. As you can hear, I'm a little congested until we get our first good freeze, which may be very soon. That ragweed is still floating around, causing some problems. It does peak in mid-September, which I use that term to also coincide with asthmatic peak week, which is also around that same time in September. So as you can see, that ragweed does play a role. But again, obesity is a problem. So we want people exercising. So it's being able to manage and pay attention to what is that issue for you. The one interesting thing with ragweed, every year we say, oh, it seems to be worse this year. Oh, it seems to be worse this year. It seems like each year the ragweed counts are getting higher and higher. And some of that may be dealing with climate change, weather. Our seasons are a little off as far as when they start, when they end, compared to, you think about, you know, 30, 40 years ago. They seem to be moving certain seasons shorter or longer than others. I do bring up mold in addition to the pollens, dealing with outdoor allergens. Most people, because mold's a 4-letter word, it's in the media, everybody thinks about indoor mold problems and water leaks, but mold is part of nature, and it's in the soil, it's in the dirt, and that can be something that can affect someone. And again, directly affected by weather. Wet rain knocks a lot of that out of the air, but as it dries and gets airborne, that can be a problem. I came across this slide and I thought it would be, again, it's not really dealing with exercise, but looking at the nutrition component. The Allergy and Asthma Network had some research that they found that there's a cross reactivity with ragweed pollen and certain fruits and certain vegetables that happen. And you look at the time that a lot of these foods, that the melons and cucumbers and zucchinis, those seem to be great in the summer, especially late summer, which is also when ragweed is high. So again, just another piece of the puzzle to be thinking about, that if you have a ragweed allergy and you're going to be exercising outside, you may want to avoid some of these foods around that time to try to help reduce that trigger. The outdoor air pollution, which is what a lot of people, when you hear about asthmatics being careful outside, that's what people tend to focus more on. Again, the allergens are very important, but most people think, oh, it's industry, oh, it's the pollution that's being generated. And EPA does regulate several pollutants. Here are that they're listed: ozone, particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide. But there are 200 other pollutants and chemicals that are emitted into the air through living. I mean, we're an industrialized country. We're trying to get away from a lot of our combustion uses, but they're still part of our life, at least at this point. So we need to be aware of them. Ozone and particulate matter are the two that we seem to hear about most often and seem to be the most problematic as an outdoor air pollutant. Here in central Indiana, you'll hear issues of no zone action days, which is trying to alert people. And I don't want to get into the next presentation too much because I think that's going to be covered a little bit, but it alerts you that there's something going on outside. As Jeremy talked about on high ozone action days, that he had issues of whether he could actually participate in sports and soccer. So it's making people aware, whether it's, using, and again, I'm not a medical provider either, but whether you're, needing to pre-treat before you enjoy those exercise, if it's severely affecting you, maybe those are days that you choose something else. But in Indianapolis, at least in centrally, we call no zone action days alerts for both particulate matter high days and ozone days. And again, I think the next presenter will talk about even the nationwide program as far as the color coding. I don't want to steal that thunder. If it doesn't get covered, we can cover that at the very end. Sources of outdoor air pollution. Again, as we've been conditioned to think immediately that it's the big bad industry, it's the utilities, it's the manufacturing plants, which they do have certain emissions, but they are also very tightly regulated, and those amounts of emissions have been reduced over the past several decades. Most people may or may not be aware that transportation is probably, or it is one of the largest contributors. And that's why you'll hear locally, we're trying to push for mass transit because the more cars we have idling, the more pollution's going into the air. We are moving to non-combustion vehicles, which will help in that issue. But the simple issue of just sitting in a drive-through idling is something that people don't think about as a way that they can help reduce these levels. Again, not to get into the next presentation. But things we do at our house, I mean, we have our own appliances, whether they're gas or electric, that's being generated at a power plant. We enjoy campfires, we enjoy fire pits, we have other things that may be polluting the air. Open burning is something that definitely is a source of outdoor air pollution. This time of year, hopefully at least people aren't burning their leaves. That's a real problem. Some rural areas, there are issues with burning trash, and they're not supposed to be burning trash, but a lot of times they're very isolated, and people don't realize it. Also, they don't have regular pickup like we in the city have routine trash pickup days. They actually would have to drive their trash somewhere to be disposed of, and so it's a lot easier to burn. So that's something, if you're looking at something you're enjoying in an environment and you notice that the smoke coming up from somewhere, that could definitely be an asthma trigger. So those are things we want people to avoid. Like I said, if you have a campfire and the wind's blowing directly in your direction at the campfire, that could definitely be a problem for you. Construction. Here in Indianapolis, our roads are a mess. Everything's being torn up. There's construction everywhere you turn. They are taking steps to try to control those dust as much as possible, wetting it down. But with that much construction, I see it on my car just driving every day. I've noticed an increase in the dust and the particulate matter that's accumulating. So again, being aware of any construction going on in areas you may be enjoying outdoor exercise or activity. Natural disasters, which I'm not sure if Barbara's going to cover here in the end, but the wildfire issues out west are a huge problem. And we have seen, as it slowly drifts and disseminates, some higher days here in the Midwest as a result of the wildfires out west. So it does affect us. And if you are traveling to the west, the wildfires are just something that unfortunately are becoming so routine that protocols are being developed on how people can live in those environments and protect themselves. Hurricanes, flooding, again, people don't think about that, but when you have that much water, that much damage, and then you go into the cleanup, it does mess with our ecosystem when those things happen. And obviously the role of climate change in all those disasters can't be not talked about. So we have to start looking at ways of controlling all of this to help with climate change. Weather is something that I think was talked about early, especially when it's really cold and dry in the winter, can definitely be a trigger for people, but we want people outside, even in the cold weather, to get that exercise in. Again, not losing track of the reason for this session today. We want people outside, we want people exercising, but again, being aware of what your individual triggers are and what may affect you, so you can try to address them before they become a problem. In the summer, obviously heat, humidity, the heat can cause problems with just overheating, exercising, different pollens that may be increased during that time frame. Rain and wind, regardless of which season it is. Rain does encourage mold growth naturally in the soil, but it also knocks it out of the air during the rain. And it slows the release of pollen. So it really is a balancing act, because it sounds like I'm talking out both sides of my mouth when I say that, but it is true, and it's all about the timing. We're finding that pollen counts outside are highest on the warm, windy days. And so again, if pollen's your problem, we're all getting used to dust masks, or we're sick of them now, but we got used to wearing them over the past couple of years. And if you're outside and a lot of these allergens or irritants are present, it may be a matter of looking at, is there some sort of respiratory protection that you're willing to do just on a walk? And then a lot of people, when they mow their grass, will also wear some sort of respiratory protection, just because of the potential triggers that exist. The cold springs and the wet summers are really what's leading to higher ragweed seasons. So again, seeing those swing in some of these temperatures, again, back to climate change, things you don't think about is actually impacting our ragweed season. These are things that you may not obviously think of. We're wanting people outside, we want them exercising. So, are they hiking? Are they playing at the park? Or, or just going for a simple walk? But again, some of these other activities can introduce some of these outdoor triggers to you. I already mentioned campfires, whether it's just the smoke from the wood. If you have children around, you're watching them already because it's a fire, but they love to throw things in the fire and watch it burn and melt. And every time you throw something in that campfire, it's releasing different chemicals. Things shouldn't be burned. Definitely plastic should not be burned. You should stick to the wood, but sometimes children just love to throw things in and see what happens. Hay rides, which is an outdoor activity. You're really not exercising necessarily, but again, you're out in the elements with a lot of things, whether it's the hay, whether it's the trees, whether it's the leaves. There are a lot of things that could be taking place. Lawn care, gardening, mowing the grass, things like that are great forms of exercise to do outside. But again, if you're digging in the dirt, you may be stirring up molds. Mulch, there are a lot of people in the spring when their companies go and put mulch all outside. That mulch sometimes have some natural molds and things that can trigger people's asthma. So again, if you know that's your issue, what can you do to avoid it or to pre-treat when you're going to be around it? Hiking in the wintertime is great, but that cold air, as you're breathing it in, can be a problem. So again, just being aware of what's going on. One of the exercises asthmatics are encouraged to do a lot is swimming. And obviously there's swimming indoors, but swimming outdoors during the summer is what most people think of. The key with that is the chlorine and actually the chloramines that are released from the pool. And if the pool chemistry is not right, you have children who are urinating in the pools that they're not supposed to, or even competitive swimmers who sweat a lot when they swim. All of those impact the chlorine and the breakdown and the chloramines. And the chloramines have shown to be a huge trigger, and they tend to hover around the pool. So that's something to be aware of. Indoors, again, it comes down to a lot of ventilation issues where there's more of a problem. Fireworks are something somebody doesn't think of, but again, there's a lot of debris, particulate matter that may fall from the sky. You may not realize, especially if you're close. And so really what it comes down to as I'm talking is anytime you're outside, there's potential for a trigger to be there if that is your individual allergen or irritant. And the important thing is being aware of what it is for you and what you need to do to protect yourself. Again, the benefits of exercise and asthma are well established. You know, it does improve your lung function, it strengthens your muscle, it improves the weight loss, so we're not dealing with the obesity and asthma issue. The overall immune system, and then as we talked about before, the stress reduction. So the benefits of asthma and exercise are well established, but know your triggers. Always have your rescue medication with you in case something were to happen. Follow your asthma action plan if you're supposed to do certain medications or pre-treat before certain activities. And then I think that's a good time for the next presenter to talk about how to control and be aware of some of these issues. We didn't quite coordinate, but hopefully we're not too repetitive. And here's my contact information if anybody needs it. So I'll stop sharing. And hopefully that was a good lead in for the next.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Well done. Okay. I'm gonna just start my slideshow. Hopefully this is working. Awesome. Okay. So great setup, Lisa, because I'm going to talk a little bit about all of these outdoor air triggers that you learned about and talk about some of the strategies to managing asthma while exercising outdoors. So we talked a little bit about the common allergens and irritants that you're exposed to, air pollution, and thank you, Lisa, for mentioning smoke from burning and wildfires. Also, that stormy weather, the air that picks up and it sometimes picks that air pollution up and blows it right across the United States. And that includes blowing pollen from grasses, trees, and weeds. And then I slipped mold in there real quick. I'm really glad that you mentioned mold because those wet leaves can be problematic for individuals with asthma for sure. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the strategies in particular. So, you know, what some of the strategies are to being active while reducing or avoiding exposure to asthma triggers. And I have to start with a very basic part of good asthma management, and that is being able to recognize your symptoms and being able to take action. So when individuals with asthma are exposed to a trigger, sometimes that trigger can be exercise, and sometimes it can be exposure to some of the allergens and irritants that you just heard about. Those symptoms could include things like a tight feeling in your chest, having a cough, or becoming short of breath during exercise. So the action is for you to stop the activity right away, to take your quick relief inhaler. Hopefully you have this on you. We'll talk a little bit about strategies for managing asthma in the school environment as well. And sitting down and trying to relax and letting that medication take control. So being aware of your signs and symptoms can really help you take action before your asthma gets worse. So let's say that you are exercising and you do experience shortness of breath and you give up. I think it's really important that we talk to our healthcare providers and not let asthma keep us from being active and healthy, because it's so important for our overall health. So talk to your doctor about activities that maybe you should avoid if there's medication that you could be taking, and what alternative activities could you do? I do want to mention our state of the air report. I'll begin talking about one of the first components of asthma triggers being outdoor air pollution. And I took a moment just to look at our state of the air report for Indiana. And so this is just a snapshot of the cities where you have the highest air pollution. So high ozone days, particle pollution for 24 hours, and particle pollution for annual. So I encourage folks to take a look at our state of the air report. These communities are ranked number 16 for high ozone days out of the 226 metropolitan areas that we look at for the state of the air report. It's ranked 75 for 24-hour particle pollution out of the 221 metropolitan areas, and ranked 22 for annual particle pollution out of the 202 metropolitan areas that we looked at in the report. So these are some of the strategies for managing asthma. And I'm going to start with sort of this big overview, and then I'll talk through some more specific steps a little bit. But it's always a good idea before exercising, especially if you're going outdoors, to check the air quality and your pollen forecast before you head out. And I have a little snapshot there of the air quality index, which I'll talk about in a moment. But many of our phones these days are now equipped with air quality index. I know I have a little indicator on my watch that I can add and look at what the air quality is for the day. And then they're also looking at pollen counts as well. So be sure to check what the air quality is. Take your medicine before you start your exercise. We recommend starting any exercise with a warm-up period, and that's for people who are working out indoors or outdoors. When going outside, if it is cold, be sure to cover your nose and mouth with a scarf when exercising in cold temperatures. Limiting exercise outdoors when the air quality is unhealthy. So we'll talk about the different levels here, and then avoiding outdoor activities when air quality is in that red, purple, or maroon zone. I also want to talk a little bit about avoiding exercise near busy roads. When we look at things like particle pollution and ozone, we know that those levels are very, very high near busy roadways. So we need to identify places where we can exercise outdoors that are away from these as much as possible. And then remember to include a cool down period. And then for people who do have are triggered or symptoms are caused by pollen, be sure to remove your clothes as soon as you come in from the outdoors, and wash your hair and your body so we can really limit that exposure to pollen. So while everyone is at risk of the harms of air pollution, certain people are more vulnerable to the health impacts. These sensitive groups include children, older adults, people living with cardiovascular disease or diabetes, people who have a chronic lung disease such as asthma or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. They're often the first to feel the effects of ozone and particle pollution, and they need to take extra steps to protect themselves from the harms. So for code yellow and orange days for these groups, for code yellow days, those sensitive to air pollution really should consider limiting their outdoor activities. And for code orange or higher, they should shift these exercises indoors. So that's a little different than what we have heard in the past. Mostly it's, code orange or higher, but for these groups who are particularly sensitive, even code yellow days can be problematic. Children and teens have lungs that continue to develop until they reach maturity. So I think it's especially important for us as parents and for educators in school personnel to pay particular attention to air quality days. Children and teens tend to be more active when they're outdoors, so they actually may inhale more air pollution. And they face greater risk of infection, coughing and bronchitis from exposure to air pollution. We also know that growing up breathing high air pollution may affect how children's lungs develop, putting them at greater risk for lung disease as they age. So all of that to say, no matter if a child has asthma or not, we need to pay particular attention to our air quality and reduce exposure to outdoor air pollutants as much as possible. So again, checking air quality before exercising outdoors, airnow.gov or some of these apps on your phones can be really, really helpful. Make an alternative plan for if the forecast is predicting high pollution levels. Particles of ozone in the air during poor air quality days can irritate the lungs and trigger asthma attacks. Something you can do is adjust the timing of outdoor exercise. So for example, exercise early in the morning before your ozone levels get high. Limit the amount of time your child spends playing outdoors if the air quality is unhealthy, or consider an indoor activity. Also keep an eye on the weather. Hot weather and even sudden changes in the weather, such as a thunderstorm, can bring on asthma symptoms. Wind can spread that pollen through the air and stir up the mold, affecting those who suffer from grasses, tree or pollen or mold allergies. And ozone levels are often higher in the afternoon when it's hotter, and prolonged activities that cause you to breathe in more air at faster rates can actually increase your exposure to these pollutants. All right, so what can schools do in particular? The American Lung Association has been a leader in managing asthma management in schools for nearly 3 decades, or over 3 decades now. So we have an initiative called the Asthma Friendly Schools Initiative, and one of the components in that initiative is all about managing asthma during physical education and recess. What we tell schools to do is make sure to encourage full participation when children are well. And then part of that is educating our school personnel about asthma, making sure that they can recognize asthma symptoms and be able to take action if asthma symptoms occur in a child. Generally, all sports can be tolerated if a child's asthma is under control. And sometimes it just requires pre-treating with a quick relief medicine as prescribed. So if schools have a self-carry policy, then children can potentially self-medicate or go to the school nurse's office to pre-medicate. When we're dealing with teens who may be participating in athletics like football and other basketball and soccer, making sure that you have these medications with you during those activities, because asthma symptoms can really start at any time. So ensuring ready access to quick relief medication through self-carry. And the Lung Association is doing a lot of work right now on working with schools on establishing policies around stocking asthma medications. So in the event that a student doesn't have a medication on them and begins to become symptomatic, we can use that stock medication in order to prevent an asthma emergency. So other solutions for schools, checking your air quality index. Some schools in the country actually are using the EPA's flag program, where they fly a flag of the color of the air pollution, air quality index for that day. So the different color flags. So raising awareness about air pollution in your area. Being flexible and being able to move activities indoors. So scheduling recess or physical education or your PE classes, scheduling those activities, moving those things indoors. And then also adjusting the timing of your trainings or workouts. So if football practice, can be early in the morning, or soccer practice can be early in the morning when ozone levels tend to be lower. And then avoiding exercise near highways and heavy traffic is really important. And for schools that are actually sited in these areas, it can be challenging, but it's important to be mindful of that and moving activities indoors and away from roadways if at all possible. Okay, a few tips for outdoor exercise in cold temperatures. So separate from air pollution, some of the symptoms can be avoided by just taking your daily controller medicines as directed, having your quick relief inhaler available to use at the first sign of your symptoms. And before going outdoors for cold air activities, using your quick relief inhaler about 20 to 30 minutes prior to the activity can be helpful. In extreme cold conditions, consider changing your activity to exercise indoors in a gym or at home, or walking in a climate-controlled environment instead of the outdoors. In that event, we do want to make sure wherever we are exercising indoors that we are limiting our exposure to any indoor triggers if you have some of those. And then coming to the end of my presentation, I just wanted to share a few resources. We do have this handy worksheet that you can take to your next doctor's appointment around staying active with lung disease. This can be used for anyone with asthma, or if you want to strike up this conversation with your child's healthcare provider as well. And just making sure you have a plan to keeping your child active and healthy during exercise, and identifying some activities that your child can participate in. And I think that's really, really important. I think for schools and for parents, having a plan of action, so an asthma action plan, this one is specific for home and schools. So it includes things like the self-carry, permissions to self-carry and administer medication, and all of the actions that a school or individual needs to take if symptoms begin. It also includes instructions to pre-treat if the child has exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. So these are a few links to those resources. And then lastly, I have to mention what you can do to get involved in improving air quality in your area. I mentioned our State of the Air report, and you can look up more information about air pollution at lung.org -SOTA, which stands for State of the Air. You can also join us by telling EPA to set stronger limits on particle pollution. We have many ways that you can get involved. You can tell your story, you can contact your elected officials, and you can even become a digital advocate, sharing things from our Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram feeds, as well as some hashtags that you can use when sharing stories in your area. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I think we can open it up for some questions.
I'm not sure who the moderator is, but if there are any questions, feel free to just speak up. I'm going to check the question and answer.
We did have a few questions come in, and Jeremy sent answers to them. So Jeremy, would you like to read the questions and the answers you provided for them?
Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to. I just jumped in and started answering them. I don't know if some of them were aimed at me, but some of them may have been broader questions. So yeah, I know this is off topic, but I do think it's really fascinating. This research by the University of Michigan School of Public Health is working with us, and basically the idea is they're calling it not broken glass, but they're calling it busy streets theory, that if you have a part of town where nobody's paying any attention and you are up to no good, if you are interested in dealing drugs or prostitution, which then can come with that, a lot of violence can come with that. And if people are coming around or engaging in that space more frequently, then that's not going to be an interesting place to hang out. But what is also interesting is it's not just displacing it from one block to the next block. The impacts can really be felt widely as you start to make more neighborhood gathering spaces. So it's not published yet. I'm working with a doctoral student. I was hoping that he would be done in May when the school year ended. And when you're getting your PhD, you're done when you're done. And so I don't have the published results yet, but we're looking at probably an 8% reduction in violence when KIB goes into a neighborhood and creates a green space. There was a question about cigarette butts. Just to my earlier point of how many of 50 billion pieces of observable litter, cigarette butts are the most littered object. Interestingly, it's a once a decade census that's done on litter, and the amount of cigarette pollution went down from 2010 to 2020 more than could be explained by reductions in smoking alone. So there was an observable reduction in the amount of cigarette litter that happened, but it is still prevalent and obviously everywhere. And so we actually did some scientific trials this year where we put different types of signage and different types of opportunities for at bus shelters and other places to see what kind of an impact we could have, working with a behavior change institute. And we found that our most successful intervention resulted in one less cigarette butt. So it was not the resounding change that we had hoped for. But we also know that just to make littering less prevalent, it just has to be frictionless. Like even if you're in a park and there's a trash receptacle, but it's full, or there's a trash receptacle and it's too far away for you to just walk to, people will drop their litter. It's stunning, but that's true. And so making it as frictionless as possible is the key. There were some other questions on stopping plastic pollution. I think we all have a part to play. I think in terms of just plastic air pollution, I think that was kind of addressed by my colleagues on this panel. I think more of it is probably from burning, backyard burning, than from other. I would guess that would be probably the number one source. So having some sort of public service announcements about, just burn if it, burn stuff that came from the ground and not stuff that came from the grocery store shelf or something would be wise. And then just the last one that I'll quickly respond to, there's a real problem right now with just the basic job force of getting trash picked up and removed. The city has fewer than the absolute minimum number of drivers that it needs to just pick up our trash every day. 50, I think, something like that is the absolute floor, and they can't get to the absolute floor, and they cannot find drivers with a commercial driver's license. Amazon, FedEx, they are paying higher cash salaries than the city can offer. The city offers pensions and offers good healthcare plans, but a lot of drivers are choosing to just take the dollars. So there's a real competitive marketplace for people with commercial driver's licenses, and it's a problem. So other things are falling through the cracks. That includes regular trash pickups. It definitely includes driving recycling, and then just to add insult to injury, a lot of people, even if they are having recyclables picked up, are not good recyclers. And so if there's too much stuff in their recycle bin that is not recyclable, the default is that it goes into the trash. It just, the equipment is not set up to sort it to the level of cleanliness that it needs to be. And so, so even more than something like 2% non-recyclable items can cause an entire load to just get tossed because it will ruin the equipment. So better that you encourage everybody to be really good about their recycling than to just say, well, I'm sure that's probably recyclable, and throw it in the bin. Really just put in your number 1 and number 2 plastics and cans and bottles and cardboard, and that's it. I wouldn't mess with anything else. So that'll actually help things overall. But it's a hard environment that we're living in right now.
I see there is a question about prescribing or prescribed or over-the-counter medicines that could serve as a trigger for asthma. And I can comment on that. And Lisa, I don't know if you want to add anything, but
Go ahead.
I'll start. I'll start. So one of the things I mentioned, I think in the first part of my presentation, is that, you know, we no longer think about asthma as a single disease. And one of the phenotypes that we know about is aspirin-induced asthma. So we know that there are some medications that can trigger asthma symptoms, pain relievers being one. So aspirin and other non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, such as ibuprofen or naproxen, can trigger asthma in people. There also is some linkage to beta blockers that are usually used to treat high blood pressure, heart disease, and migraine headaches. And then ACE inhibitors as well. So these are usually used for hypertension and heart disease, like lisinopril and enalapril, I think is how you say it. These typically, they don't cause asthma, but there are a small percentage of patients who are on these drugs and develop a cough and can cause some wheeze. So I would say I would talk with a healthcare provider if you think at all if any of your medications are causing asthma symptoms. But those are typically the ones that we find that are most associated with asthma symptoms.
I don't have anything to add to that. It was the aspirin was the main one that I was aware of.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. I'm looking through. So I'm not sure who the moderator is. Is it Carolyn?
Yep, that's me.
Okay.
I don't have any other questions come in, and none were sent to me. Does anybody else have any questions? I mean, you can raise your hand and we can let you talk out loud if you want, or you can send them in the Q&A or in the chat.
I did have one other thing to offer to folks, which I'll drop into the chat, but there was oh, I can't drop it into the full chat. There is a website that I was involved with helping create a number of years ago called iturnitoff.com. And it is a whole bunch of toolkits. Engine idling was mentioned earlier. So, there are a lot of modern cars that when it's at a red light now, the engine will turn off. It's a fuel efficiency. It helps with fuel efficiency. So there is some dual messaging here that it is not only, with the cost of gas, what it is, it not only saves fuel. Thanks, Carolyn. But it also is better for children's health. There's some toolkits in there, and again, just some interesting resources there that could be helpful to folks that are really worried about and angry about idling. And I'll tell one quick story. A friend of mine lives in New York City. It originally was only the police officers in New York that could issue an idling ticket in the city, and police officers in New York City have other things to do than issue idling tickets, so none of them were ever issued. And a friend of mine just was really angry at all of the commercial vehicles, buses, and so forth that idled all day long. So he convinced the city council to change the ordinance to also allow people that were writing parking violations to write idling tickets. By default, those cars weren't moving, those trucks weren't moving, but they found out that the ticket writers didn't want to have confrontation with somebody who was sitting in the driver's seat. And so no tickets were getting written. And then he got the city council to change it a third time. And it allowed anybody who could capture with their cell phone 3 minutes of video evidence of here's a bus idling on the corner of Broadway and 42nd, send it into the city's Department of Environmental Protection. And if you sent it in and it was processed, you would keep 25% of the fine. And so he's a banker. He's living in New York City. He's doing just fine, but he made $11,000 last
Oh my gosh.
idling fines. And the city collected $33,000 in idling fines that they never would have collected otherwise. So the city was better off. Air pollution was lowered, and my friend made enough money for a number of nice nights out with his girlfriend. So, but anyway, I just have been imagining like an army of middle schoolers and high schoolers walking around with their cell phones, all to get an extra 75 or $100 from their share of lodging idling complaints, and how we could think about that and change behavior collectively that way.
To go along with that, one of our schools locally, I think it's been about a decade ago now, was using the Fly the Flag program at their school. That science teachers moved on, so I don't think it's happening anymore. But part of their program for the no idling at the school, which by the way, in Indiana, schools are to have a no idle policy as part of the school indoor air rule. But they had the kids to walk through the line and knock on the window and ask the parent to do it. So it was more of a, oh gosh, I have to set a good example because a child's telling me I'm doing something wrong. And so that was the way they were successful in getting the drop-off line to not idle.
That's excellent. I forgot to mention idling is one of the strategies, the key strategies that schools can do in managing asthma. Or
Well, it looks like we're almost on time.
yeah, we
11:30, so give people a couple minutes back.
Yeah.
Carolyn, will you be posting the presentation? I think that was in one of the notes.
Yes, give it about a week and it'll be posted up on our YouTube site on the IRHA YouTube channel. And if you guys want to send me your slide deck for all your slides, I can send that out if everybody wants that.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, if everybody's finished and we have no other questions, I just want to thank you, the presenters, and everybody who participated today with questions. And Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone.